Nicole Nelson grew up in Iowa. She graduated from Luther College with majors in fine art and elementary education. She is currently working on her master's degree in art education. Teaching people about different kinds of art and how to make it themselves is her passion, whether they're young or old, in school or in workshops. After living in 5 different cities around the United States, she and her husband moved their 3 kids back to the Midwest and currently live in Clear Lake, Iowa. Welcome, Nicole. Thank you for sharing your creativity with me and the Clear Lake Art Center today. We are excited to learn more about your creative process and some of the mediums you work with.
Great. Thank you for having me.
Yes, we're excited about this. So, why don't you talk a little bit about your creative process and maybe some of the mediums you work with for those of our members who are not familiar with your work?
All right. So I like a little bit of everything. Um, the one thing that I do on a consistent basis is I keep an art journal. So every single morning, I work in it for anywhere from 15 minutes to 2 hours, depending on how much time I have. If it's before a day when I need to be a teacher at school, then it's maybe only 15 minutes. When on the weekend and in the summer, sometimes it stretches all day. So my favorite things are collage and watercolor. I come back to watercolor over and over again. Uh, I love the vibrancy of the colors. And as someone who maybe only has 15 minutes to work, they dry very quickly so that I can adjust what I'm doing to that time. Um, Lately, I've been sort of uh, addicted to slow stitching. So I've been doing a lot of like Boro inspired, which is a Japanese style of taking scraps and taking well loved and well used fabrics and giving them new life. And so I've been doing that. And then I've also started doing some linocut carving and been printing those. So a lot of my artwork tends to be a little bit whimsical and illustrative, um, and it has a lot of garden kinds of qualities, birds, flowers, um, bugs, those kinds of things, because those things just make me happy. So, and because it's in my art journal most of the time, I'm usually doing things to kind of help get my mood going for the day. So,
Do you use your journal to record ideas for future works, or would you consider your journal work of its own?
mm, a little bit of both. It started out more as just a collection of all of my ideas, a collection of quotes and Bible verses. Those I tend to get inspired by those a lot, and was just sketches of things that I'd been working on. There for a while, it took on a life of its own, and I would scan in those artworks each day. And I used to have a blog that I would post the artworks on all the time. And then quite a few of them ended up being licensed for greeting cards and posters and some different things like that. And then I'd just purchase prints of them because they enjoyed them. So I had an Etsy store for a while that sold those. Um, and then it felt really contrived, and it
Okay.
felt like the journals were becoming less journals and more just collections of artwork to please other people. So I flip flopped, and it has definitely gone back more to artwork for me that is definitely reflecting my thoughts and processes that day in particular. So, for example, before Christmas this year, school time was it was chaotic, and I noticed that my artwork became extremely abstract and chaotic. There was stuff just all over the place. And then I've been in quarantine for the last 3 weeks, and everything has become very specific, and lots more of the lino cuts, and very symbol based. And so that's one of the things that I like about the journals too, is that it really tracks my journey as an artist, and I can see where I've been at in my creativity. So
With you being in quarantine, has that worked its way into your art making? Are you making art that reflects on the pandemic and how it's affected you and your family?
um a little bit, not as much. There's been some kinds of those things, but I don't have honestly go very deep a lot of times in my
Okay.
artwork. So but what I have seen is that with all, it's been very snowy and cold while I've been home. And so the colors in my journal have become much brighter.
Okay.
There's not just blue skies, it's purple skies and yellow and orange skies and super bright colored little birds. And so I'm definitely thinking about what's going to happen when I don't have to be stuck inside my house anymore. Um, and when there's actually color outside my window again.
The let's go back a little bit because you were talking about in your journaling, it started to work towards maybe a more commercial feel, or you felt like you were making your art for somebody else and not for yourself. Could we dig in that a little deeper? Like how did you sense that happening, and how was it affecting how you were working?
When I was working with the licensing group, when I originally started, they had just found all of my different images through Pinterest and Facebook and Instagram. Um, and so they were very interested in all of these pieces. And then they gave me like a list of 100 of them that they wanted to license. And then as we went down and through them, they're like, oh, well, that one has a quote from this person and this one has a quote from that, or this is was inspired by a book you read, so we can't use any of those. So now we need you to just do um, just only thoughts that you yourself have come up with, and we need you to do the artwork on one piece of paper, and we need all of the lettering and everything else that you do on another one, because my lettering was a huge
Hmm.
part of the work. And then I'm like, well, that's not even how my process. I usually start with the words and start with the lettering, and then the images form around all of that. So they were wanting me to work backwards, from my total process of how I make artwork. And I got stuck. Like I couldn't create, I couldn't come up with any words, I couldn't come up with any images. Um, and it became very like stilted. There wasn't the emotion or the movement that is I'm usually kind of known for in my pieces. And they were they were very static, and they were boring. They were awful. So I finally was just like, oh, this is not working. I've got to readjust this and kind of go from a different point.
Did you decide not to license or not work with the group?
I actually did. And part of that was that I was back teaching elementary kids again, and I didn't have as much time to devote to completely brand new ideas all of the time for a licensing group. Um, but I also realized that wasn't my fit. I thought I had always wanted to be a licensed illustrator.
Mhm.
Um, and I realized that teaching kids and teaching adults or just any people about all of the options in artwork meant a lot more to me than having a piece of paper that was licensed or seeing my artwork at Target. So it meant more to have those individual connections with people.
It sounds like language and words are a big part of your creative process. Could you talk a little bit more about?
A lot of them do, yes. So, and that goes all the way back to when I was a kid. I So the weird place that I ended up getting hooked on quotes was my aunt gave me this Precious Moments cookbook. And on the sides, like in the outside margins of every page, there was a quote. And as I was looking through all the recipes, didn't look at the recipes at all. And I started writing down all of my favorite quotes, and kind of started collecting those in a book. And then I had always been very interested in lettering. And so as a fourth grader, I told my parents I want a calligraphy kit for my birthday. And so they got me one, and I taught myself how to do different kinds of calligraphy and did that for years too. I did used to do wedding invitations and that kind of thing. Um, but I also got to the point where I got so freaked out by the preciseness of it, and I'm not a very precise precision kind of a person. I'm more loose. And um, so my lettering then kind of took on a life of its own. And then another piece of that puzzle of how it, or the flow of it, is when my kids were little, and we moved every year to 18 months, and I never had an art studio, but I could do scrapbooking with my other friends, and that was when
Hmm.
scrapbooking was really big. And I was not okay with just taping down photos and putting a sticker on it. I wanted it to have words flowing through it and quotes and the stories, and I really liked how scrapbooking melded together the images and the words to create stories.
Mhm.
Um, and so that really started. And then that's when the art journaling started as well. Then, when I realized I had way too many scrapbooks and no place to store them, and I needed something that was more of a artistic outlet and not a cut and paste kind of a thing. They're a
When
huge.
did you first start bringing images um, into your work? Did you start lettering first and then drawing and artwork came from that? Or were you producing images and then started the lettering?
It was pretty organic.
Okay.
So there was a little bit of both. Um, so, like when I was in high school and college, the lettering and the images were very separate. And I didn't even think about putting the two together. Uh, and I think that was partially, as a college student, they thought my assignments were you need to be making this deep artwork and very technical artwork, and it's all about the images and the skills and the techniques. And then on the side I was doodling all of my lettering and all of my quotes and doing that kind of thing. And it wasn't until I was teaching and out on my own and really had that opportunity to meld the two together,
Mm.
and realize that I could put the two together, that I started doing that. So, so yeah, and then it just took a life of its own. And now they just go back and forth, and yeah, there's not one without the other.
Where does the fabric and stitching come into your art making practice? I can see similarities, but that's far different from lettering and drawing.
It is, but it's not. So,
Help us make the connection.
so yeah, so color has always been something that I absolutely loved. I like trying to do a black and white piece for me, which is kind of strange. You would think with the lettering that, but my lettering wasn't. It was all over the place and movement and different colors and things. So, and I grew up with a mom who sewed costumes and clothing constantly. And then I had a grandmother who was loved quilting. So I was always around textiles and fabrics. And then in college, I was the assistant to the professor of the weaving and bookmaking area. And so I fell in love with all those yarns and all those textures and colors. So I attempted quilting and I attempted making clothing, and I'm not precise. And so I had all of these wonky little quilts and clothing that would just like not fit anyone. So I gave it up. I had all of this fabric that I had bought because I would love the feel of it and the colors of it and how they played together, and I was fascinated by how people would could get it to work. um and but I just couldn't, and so I gave it up for a long time, and I moved the fabric from house to house to house, much to my husband's chagrin. He's like, why are we moving this box of fabric again? And then pandemic hit, and somehow I came across Boro inspired stitching on, I think, Instagram, and I was fascinated. And so this took all of those little pieces of fabric and all those colors and all of the lines of sketching and the movement of the stitching and how it moves together to create a flow. Um, and I got hooked. And so that's how my stitching kind of comes together then. And so most of the things that I've made with my stitching projects, I haven't bought any fabric. I'm using old sheets. I'm using just bits of fabric that I had from all of the projects that I screwed up in the past and that were left over from my mom and my grandma's stashes. And I've been able to use all those tiny pieces and fit them together to make stories. So it's really forming together to make that. And one of the first pieces that I did, someone told me about the 25 million stitches project. It was a collective of people from all over the world doing hand stitching to represent all of the refugees in the world.
Mm.
And so I made a piece to go with that. And yeah, and so it was again part of that whole story weaving together kind of a thing.
Sure. Can you
Yeah.
tell us a little bit more about that style of stitching?
Yes. So you know what? I have a piece here close
Okay.
up. So this is one. Here, I'll hold it up kind of. And you can show it too. So this is literally all just tiny pieces of fabric. And then I have done running stitch over it. So the entire thing is completely stitched. There's thousands and thousands of little tiny stitches in this. And it comes out of actually a lot of different traditions around the world. So Boro is from Japan, and it comes from when they had their indigo dyed fabrics that the farmers and the lower class people had. They would make these fabrics. They would spend all of this time creating that, and then they would wear them and wear them and wear them and wear them. But they didn't have the money to just make brand new ones and the time to make brand new ones. So they started piecing together um, things to mend them. And it's just a visible form of mending that turned into an artwork. And especially as you look back at things, the pieces that they made hundreds of years ago, we're now really looking at them with an artistic eye and seeing that um, they aren't just little bits of things, but there's that story behind it. There's also, it's called kantha stitching in India. And then there's another, I forget the name of it, from Africa, but there's another version that comes out of Africa that is very similar. So it's something that people all along have never wanted to throw away, all of those tiny little bits. Um, and can't, they just want to reuse them and make them have a purpose and make them into something beautiful. And so it comes out of that tradition.
Do you ever see your artwork in the future, everything coming together? The words, the fabric, the stitches, the drawing, the color?
Yes, yes. So I would like, one of the things that I did do as a licensing thing was I created fabric patterns for a while.
Mm.
And some of them had my lettering on them. So that's something that I have, some of those scraps and the test fabrics from those that I would like to incorporate into some of the stitching. Bookmaking is also something that I've always found fascinating. And good old Instagram, I have discovered a whole world of people like me who like to stitch covers of books and then fill it with prints and drawings and words and things. So I can definitely see that starting to happen. And actually, like up there on my shelf, there's a few examples of, I've been playing with it. So nothing too fabulous yet, but always something to be learning and moving forward. And I like seeing how things can fit together in new ways. Yeah.
So you are an art teacher.
Yes.
That's how you make an income. Could you talk a little bit about how do you inspire your students when they're feeling stuck? Which probably
Oh,
isn't very often because kids often just take the material and run with it.
they do. And that's one of my favorite things about, I teach kindergarten through sixth grade. And I tend to give them some kind of a motivation to get them going in the beginning. So we look at a lot of different cultures. We look at illustrators and picture books, how they drew things, or the thinking that maybe went into the illustrations that they came up with. Um, Sometimes we just look at animals. Like I did a project on sloths with the kids last fall, and we looked at all sorts of different photographs of sloths, and then they had to make a collage. And come up with something on their own. And, they were putting masks on them, and we learned that avocados wouldn't be in the world anymore if it hadn't been for ancient sloths, because they ate them. And so the kids were putting avocados all over their artworks, and they inspire me then. And so then it's easy to get a dialogue going with the kids. That, okay, where did you get that idea? How did you come up with that? And then I like when they're at tables together, because then they all start sharing their different ideas, and their chatter um, creates different ideas and things that they just run with then. And I'm not the kind of art teacher that is like, okay, this is what we're going to do. You're going to glue this down. They'll be like, well, we wanted to paint this. We don't have the paints. And I'm like, well, let's get the paints out. So I think, yeah, wait, where was I going? Where did I start with this? How
Uh,
kids get
how
their
do you,
ideas?
yeah, how would you inspire your students if they
Oh yeah, if they're
don't have
stuck.
a direction?
Yeah.
But I
So
think you answered the question. I think it
yeah.
would be hard for a student not to have some sort of idea or motivation to start making.
Yeah. Well, and even Another thing that really affected me is I took a workshop with a man named Peter London. He is a instructor, artist, workshop leader out of Massachusetts, and he taught us in that workshop that our hands never lie. Our hands know what our hearts want to say, and sometimes our brain wants to stop that message that's going between our hand and our heart, um, but we can't let it. So that's something that I teach my kids at school. So, like, for example, one kid, we were drawing toucans and he messed it up and he's like, "Oh, what is that?" And I'm like, "Well, that's the baby sitting behind the mom's beak." And he's like, "Oh, it is." And he totally ran with it. Um, so sometimes we think, "Oh, that's a mess up," or, "Oh, that wasn't how I wanted that to be." But really, it's an opportunity to look
Mm.
at what our heart wants to put on the paper, not what somebody else wants us to put on the paper, but what's truly the message coming out of us through the artwork. So,
That's an amazing, inspirational statement.
yeah.
More people need to hear that, I think.
Yes,
That's an
they do.
excellent statement. Um, so you're in grad school. You've
Yeah.
decided to further your education. Could you talk a little bit about your motivation to return and what you're getting from that?
So I graduated from college 20 years ago or more. And I went to a liberal arts college. So it was not a specific arts education program. And it was very good and I got a lot out of it. But I don't know that it fully prepared me to be an art teacher the way I wanted to be.
Mm.
And then I took 12 years off and stayed home with the kids. And then when I went back in, I felt disjointed. Um, Trends change in education so often. And I felt like as I reached out to other art teachers or as I was looking at curriculum and at different things that I was just missing were the things that were really being emphasized in art education today. So I decided to go back and start taking classes. And now I am fully addicted to taking classes. So I love that it shapes how I think. It shapes how I can help kids be not just artists. I don't want them to think that every single one of them needs to come out of there being a painter or a potter. I want them to think that they can be graphic designers and movie designers and interior designers and garden landscape designers, and that they can really think about all of the visual literacy that's around them. They're inundated with images constantly, and they need to make decisions about those things. And then they can take those processes and that creativity and apply it into math and science and reading. And I want them to see that the arts are an integral part of life, that it's
Mm.
and that technology is great, but as humans we need to express ourselves, and sometimes a computer takes how we're trying to express ourselves and um, it takes that humanness out of it, and we need ways to be able to connect on that very basic level as humans still, and art helps us do that. So and
Uh,
my classes are helping me do that. So
Another powerful statement. Absolutely. Well, North, I was really fortunate to have you teaching our youth and inspiring them to use their creativity throughout their life. That's one of the aspects of the Art Center that we really believe in, is that creativity is for everybody every day in every aspect of our lives. And the more we can engage with that, the richer our life can be. Well,
All
thank
right.
you for sharing a little bit about your process and your creativity. We really appreciate you having this time together. I also say Nicole is a very active individual at the Clear Lake Arts Center, and we love having her, and we are very excited to be able to share her story today.
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed getting to chat with you.
Yes, thank you.